They say everything is bigger in Texas, except for the nightmares. The land is vast, the sky's endless, but hidden among the wild stretches of highway and forgotten towns, something far darker lurks. It's not just a place filled with legends. There are stories, whispers in the wind, that refuse to stay buried. Stories of strange encounters, unsolved mysteries, and entities that should have never crossed the border. They're told in hushed voices, passed down in secrecy, for fear that acknowledging them might invite something far worse. Tonight, we venture deep into the dark heart of Texas, where the air thickens with every mile. These are not just stories. They are real people, real encounters with the inexplicable. Some never came back. Others were changed forever. From haunted highways to vanished towns, restless spirits to creatures that defy explanation. These are the terrifying true stories locals dare not speak of. But tonight we will. Before we dive in, let me ask you something. Are you brave enough to face the darkness? Most viewers make a mistake, leaving without subscribing. By doing that, they miss out on the creepiest, most chilling tales that only the bravest fans will dare to watch. Don't let that be you. Hit that subscribe button now, because what you're about to hear is only the beginning. The night is still young, and the terror is just getting started. Where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Let me know in the comments as the horror unfolds. Now let's begin. In the heart of East Texas, there's a stretch of road that locals call the Widow's Walk. It's not just any highway. This one has seen more than its fair share of mysterious disappearances and unexplained deaths. The locals know better than to travel it at night, for those brave enough to do so have reported encounters that could send chills down even the most hardened spine. Legend says a ghostly woman, dressed in black, haunts the highway late at night, her face hidden, her presence unmistakable. But don't be fooled. The truth behind these sightings is far darker than any legend could tell. She's said to appear suddenly, standing in the middle of the road, always in the dead of night. A solitary figure, draped in black, her face hidden beneath a veil. No one knows who she is or why she haunts the highway, but the stories are all too similar. Drivers, speeding down the road, feel a sudden chill in the air, like the world itself holds its breath. And just when they think they've imagined it, just when they convince themselves it's nothing more than fatigue or a trick of the mind, they blink and she's gone, vanishing into the darkness as if she were never there at all. But some have seen much more. The ones who linger too long, who push past the fear. They tell a different tale. A tale of a woman who doesn't just disappear, but of a presence that follows them, that waits until the moment they least expect it. Some say she's a lost soul, cursed to walk the highway for eternity. Others claim she's something far darker. A phantom of vengeance, a warning from beyond. No one really knows. What's certain is this: the more you try to understand her, the closer you get to something far worse. Something that waits for the right moment to reveal itself. One driver on a lonely stretch of road was making his way home after a long shift. The night was quiet, the only sounds the hum of his tires against the asphalt and the occasional rustle of the wind in the trees. He had passed this stretch of road countless times before, but tonight was different. Tonight, something felt off. The air seemed thicker, heavier, as if the very night itself was pressing in around him. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him, something unseen. And then, without warning, there she was, standing in the middle of the road, her dark figure blocking his path. He couldn't tell if it was a trick of the light or if his mind was playing games with him, but there she stood, motionless, her head lowered, her hands hanging at her sides like an eerie marionette. He slammed on the brakes, his heart leaping into his throat as the wheels screeched against the pavement. Time seemed to slow as his car skidded, almost careening off the road. The headlights flashed across her form, but when he turned back to look, she was gone. Just like that. Disappeared. His breath caught in his chest. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tight that his knuckles turned white. He looked around, half expecting her to be right there, inches away, but there was nothing. Just the cold, silent road stretching ahead. Shaking, he continued on, trying to push the image of her from his mind. But it lingered. It haunted him. The next day, when he went to inspect his car, something caught his eye. There, on the side of the door, were strange marks. Long, jagged scratches that seemed to have been made from the inside, as though something or someone had clawed its way out. The marks were deep, gouged into the metal, and there was no way to explain them. No sign of a tree branch or an animal. Just the unmistakable impression of something alive, something that shouldn't have been there. As the stories of the woman in black began to circulate, more and more drivers came forward, each recounting their own terrifying experiences. The tale of the man who saw her in the middle of the road was only the beginning. As the sightings continued, a chilling pattern emerged. One driver, an older man making his way home after a late night of work, recounted something that still sent shivers down his spine. He had seen her, just as the others had, standing in the road, her figure barely visible in the fog. But this time, he didn't swerve. Instead, he slowed to a stop, unsure of what to do. For a moment, the two of them just stared at each other, the silence of the night pressing in around them. Then, without warning, the woman began to move toward him, her steps deliberate and slow, as though she was beckoning him forward. The man, despite the terror in his chest, felt an odd compulsion to open the door. Maybe it was the loneliness, maybe the isolation of the road, but something pushed him to offer help. She didn't speak, didn't give any indication of her intentions. She just climbed into the passenger seat, her eyes still hidden beneath the veil, the only thing visible being her pale hands resting in her lap. The moment she sat down, the temperature inside the car plummeted. He could see his breath in the air, even as his hands gripped the steering wheel in a tight, desperate hold. The radio, which had been silent, crackled to life, emitting nothing but a loud static hiss. The man's grip tightened on the wheel, his heart racing. He glanced at her briefly. There was something off about her. Something wrong. It was as if she wasn't entirely there, like she was fading in and out of existence. But before he could ask her where she was headed or what she needed, the car jerked, as if it had hit something in the road. He glanced to the side. She was gone. The passenger seat was empty, and the air returned to its usual warmth. He sped into the next town, his heart pounding in his chest. It wasn't until the next morning that he noticed the strange scratches on his dashboard, marks that didn't belong to any human hand, as if something, or someone, had tried to claw its way out of the car from the inside. But the woman, the one who had sat beside him just hours before, was nowhere to be found. Days passed, and the man who had picked her up that night was never seen again. His car, the one he had driven so many miles, was found days later, abandoned on the side of the road. The car was overturned, its windows shattered, the tires torn and deflated as if something, some force, had taken it off course. The door was left ajar, and the seatbelt, still fastened, was left hanging loosely by the side. But there was no sign of the man, no trace of him anywhere. It was as if he had vanished, leaving only the wreckage of his car behind. The local authorities investigated, but they found nothing. No footprints, no signs of struggle, nothing to suggest what had happened or where he had gone. The woman, if she had even been real, was nowhere to be found. Some say the woman still walks the highway, still waits for the next unlucky driver to cross her path, forever searching for the one who will take her home. Some say she's just a ghost, condemned to walk the earth forever. But others, the ones who know the old stories, believe she is something far older than any mere spirit. They say she is a curse, a being who roams that stretch of highway, luring travelers to their doom. Was she real, or was she just a product of fear? Of the loneliness that haunts the open road, the isolation that drives the mind to madness? Some will never know. But those who've seen her, those who've crossed her path, will never forget the feeling, that icy chill that grips your heart when you realize you're not alone. The highway remains, as it always has, stretching endlessly through the dark Texas night, waiting for the next traveler. And the woman, if she's out there, will be waiting too, watching. And when she appears, there will be no warning, no time to react, only a cold, suffocating terror that drags you closer to her. Until one night, like so many before you, you too will vanish into the night, leaving nothing but an empty road and the whispers of something far worse than fear. Near the outskirts of Austin, a small town vanished overnight. No warning, no explanation. One moment it was there, with its humble homes and quiet streets, just like any other small Texas town. The next, it was gone. Entirely. No one saw anything unusual. No one heard a thing. But the next morning, when the townsfolk arrived to find their homes, their businesses, and their friends, they found nothing. Not a single soul. The streets were silent. The houses stood empty, as if the entire town had been erased. No signs of struggle. No signs of a hasty departure. Just emptiness. Some say it was a government experiment gone wrong. Perhaps something, some project, some test, went awry, erasing the town and its people in a single catastrophic night. Others, those who remember the old stories, claim it was a curse, an ancient power that had been lying dormant beneath the earth for centuries, waiting for the right moment to awaken. They whisper of an old legend, one that speaks of a town built on sacred ground that had once been the site of rituals long forgotten by time. What's undeniable is that no one can explain why it happened, or what truly erased the town from the maps. The records are all gone, strangely missing from archives, as if someone deliberately erased all traces of its existence. The people who had lived there, the families, the children, they had just vanished. But the land was untouched. The houses stood as they had been, the streets quiet and waiting. The town wasn't destroyed, it simply ceased to exist, as if the very fabric of reality had been altered to make it disappear. One night, a man, who had once called this town home, returned after years of being away. He had heard the whispers, the strange rumors of the town's sudden disappearance, but he refused to believe it. Driven by a need to find closure, he returned to the place where his childhood had unfolded. The old house, the one where he'd spent so many summers, the one that had stood as a testament to everything he'd once known. But when he arrived, the house was just as it had been all those years ago. At first, it felt like a strange déjà vu, a dream, as if time had stood still. But when he entered, something was different. The air felt heavy, charged with a strange, thick stillness. The silence, so complete, was almost suffocating. It was as if the house had been holding its breath, waiting for him. As he walked through the familiar doorway, the creak of the floorboards beneath his feet was the only sound that broke the silence. He stepped into the living room, and there it was, the table where they used to eat as a family. The chairs were all still in place, exactly as he remembered them, but no one was sitting there. No food, no laughter, no conversation. The place was empty. But it wasn't the emptiness that struck him the most. It was the overwhelming sense that something was missing. The life that had once filled the house was gone. The warmth, the voices, the energy, it had all disappeared. And as he made his way through the rooms, he noticed something even more disturbing. There were no signs that anyone had left. No suitcase by the door. No jacket thrown over the back of a chair. The house wasn't abandoned. It was as if his family had simply vanished into thin air, without so much as a trace. He left, but the feeling, the unease, the confusion, lingered with him. His heart still heavy, his mind still racing, he couldn't shake the sense that something was terribly wrong. And though he tried to tell himself that maybe it was just his imagination, he couldn't ignore the reports from others who had also returned. One by one they came. People who had grown up in that town, people who had once called it home, began to trickle back. They were drawn by a strange pull, an inexplicable need to return to the place where they had once felt safe. But what they found was far from comforting. They saw figures in the windows, fleeting glimpses of people, shadows passing by. At first, they thought it was a trick of the light, that maybe the homes weren't as abandoned as they'd seemed. But when they knocked on the doors, the silence was deafening. No answer, not a sound, just the hollow echo of their own knuckles against the wood. So they pushed the door open, hoping for some sign of life. But what they found was far worse than the emptiness outside. The homes, just like the man's childhood house, were completely empty, frozen in time. The furniture was still arranged as though someone had been there just moments ago. Books left half open, dishes still on the table, coats hanging by the door. And yet, no one was there. No one to explain why they'd vanished. No explanation for what had happened to the people who once lived in these houses, the families that had called this place their own. As the whispers of the vanished town spread, one person, a daring investigator, decided to uncover the truth once and for all. Determined to understand what had happened, he entered the town in the dead of night, armed only with his camera. The streets were still, too still. The shadows seemed to cling to the buildings, suffocating the very air. As he walked down the empty street, his footsteps echoed louder than they should have, each step growing heavier with each passing second. It was clear that something was not right, that this town, once filled with life, now carried a weight far beyond its empty streets. He moved deeper into the town, his camera capturing the eerie stillness that surrounded him. But the footage he recorded was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. The lens, dirty and smeared, flickered as he walked, catching strange, blurry shapes in the periphery, figures moving, but not with any real purpose. They drifted through the streets like shadows, walking in circles over and over, as though they were trapped in an endless loop, unable to break free. It was as if time itself had been fractured here, and the people who once lived in the town had become part of something far more disturbing. Trapped in the very streets they had once walked, their existence nothing more than a haunting reflection of the past. The investigator, his heart racing, tried to get a closer look, but the figures seemed to vanish the moment he focused on them. His breathing grew heavier, his panic palpable, as he turned the corner of a familiar street. But as he did, the camera captured something far worse. A face. A face in the window of a house. No, not just a face, but a dozen faces, all staring at him, their eyes wide, unblinking, their mouths frozen in silent screams. His hand shook as he raised the camera, but the faces were gone in an instant. And then silence. The camera cut off. To this day, the town remains abandoned, its streets still and empty. The buildings, now weathered and decaying, stand as silent witnesses to the mystery that remains unsolved. Some say the land itself has absorbed the souls of those who once lived there, their spirits forever tied to the town, trapped in an endless loop of time. Others whisper that it's not just the people who vanished. Something else, something much darker, took hold of the town that night. Something that made it disappear from the maps and from memory. Locals who live nearby still speak in hushed tones about the town, and the few brave, or foolish, souls who dare to venture near its borders at midnight. They claim that if you listen closely, you can hear the faint sounds of life. The rustling of papers, the clink of dishes, the laughter of children, all coming from somewhere in the ghostly quiet of the town. But when you approach, the sounds fade into the silence, leaving you with nothing but the overwhelming sensation of being watched. No one has dared to return for long, and those who have gone in search of answers often come back, different. They don't speak of what they saw, but their eyes carry a weight, a deep sadness that only those who have glimpsed the truth can understand. Some believe that the town is waiting for someone to break the cycle, to return the missing people to their rightful place. Others fear that the town is a warning, a place where the very fabric of reality has been bent and twisted, a place that no one should enter. But one thing is certain, the town remains. And no matter how many times it's forgotten, no matter how many years pass, it will never truly disappear. Not until it's ready. Deep in the dense forests of the piney woods, a creature stalks the night. It's not a bear or a wild cat. It's something bigger, darker, and far more dangerous. A thing that hunts under the cover of darkness, moving silently between the trees, leaving no trace of its existence except for the blood of its victims. The locals speak of it only in whispers, their voices laced with fear. Some say it's an ancient predator, a creature from a time long forgotten. Others believe it's something worse, a twisted being, born from the very depths of the forest, its hunger endless and its rage unrelenting. But whatever it is, it's real. And it's waiting. Locals have heard its growls, its screams echoing in the dead of night, long after the sun has set. A sound so bone-chilling, so filled with pain, that even the bravest of hunters have felt their blood run cold. It's said to come from deep within the heart of the forest, where the trees are so thick that daylight barely touches the ground. For years, people have ventured into the piney woods, searching for answers, but what they've found is far worse than anything they could have imagined. Hunters and campers have gone missing, vanishing without a trace. All that's left behind are strange claw marks etched into the trees, marks so deep that it seems as though the creature was trying to rip through the very fabric of the earth itself. And the scent, that foul, putrid stench of decaying flesh that clings to the air, thick and suffocating, like a rotting carcass that refuses to die. One night, a group of friends, 4 young men looking for an adventure, decided to camp deep within the piney woods. They had heard the stories, of course, but they were skeptical. After all, what could be lurking in the woods that they couldn't handle? As they set up their tents and gathered around the fire, the evening seemed peaceful enough. The air was cool, the sky clear, and the night still and quiet. But as the evening wore on, the atmosphere began to shift. The sounds of the forest, usually filled with the calls of birds and insects, began to fade, replaced by a heavy silence. It started subtly at first, a faint crackling in the underbrush, as if something was moving just out of sight. Then came the twigs snapping, one after another, like footsteps in the dark. They laughed it off at first, thinking it was just a deer or perhaps a raccoon. But as the hours passed, the sounds grew closer. The low growls started next, deep, guttural sounds that seemed to reverberate through the very ground beneath them. The growls were too low to place, too unnatural to be anything they had ever heard before. The air around the campfire grew thick, almost suffocating, as if the very atmosphere was weighed down by something heavy, something alive, something that was watching them. The wind had completely stopped. The trees, which had been swaying gently before, were now still, unnaturally still. It was as if the forest itself had stopped breathing. A deep unease settled over the group. What had begun as a fun camping trip had slowly turned into something else. Something dangerous. The rustling in the trees grew louder, closer. But when they tried to peer into the darkened woods, they could see nothing. The shadows seemed to twist, to move, as if the forest was alive, its very soul watching them, waiting. The night wore on, and the air grew thicker, heavier with each passing minute. The growls, once distant, were now unnervingly close. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sent their nerves spiraling. The group huddled around the fire, their eyes darting to the dark edges of the woods, where something large, something ancient, was watching them. And then suddenly it happened. A loud crash from the bushes shattered the stillness. The ground seemed to tremble as something massive, something powerful, moved through the underbrush, sending branches snapping like matchsticks. The sound was deafening, the force so great that it felt as if the entire forest itself was coming alive, shaking with anger. Panic swept through the group. Without thinking, they grabbed their belongings and ran, their feet pounding the earth as they raced toward the safety of their cars, away from the growing terror in the woods. But even in their rush to escape, they couldn't shake the feeling of being pursued. It was as though something was following them, just out of sight but always there. The oppressive silence returned as they made their way back to the clearing where they had set up camp, but the damage had already been done. Whatever had been in those woods, whatever had caused that crash, had left its mark. The next morning, they returned to the camp, their hearts still racing, their bodies exhausted. But what they saw when they stepped into the clearing made their blood run cold. Around the campfire, surrounding their tents, were enormous footprints, massive, deep impressions in the earth. The footprints were unlike anything they had ever seen before. Too large for any bear, too wide for a mountain lion. And the shape. It was wrong. The toes were splayed out like claws, the tracks dragging deeper than they should, as though the creature that had made them was far heavier than anything known to roam the woods. The group stood in stunned silence, staring at the tracks that circled their camp, closing in on them. The footprints were fresh, the ground still wet with dew, and yet there were no signs of where the creature had gone. It was as if it had simply vanished, leaving only the terrifying evidence of its existence behind. The stories of the creature in the woods grew with each passing week, spreading like wildfire among the locals. But it wasn't until the hunt for it escalated that the true horror began to unfold. One man, a seasoned hunter who had spent years in these very woods, decided that he would find this beast and end the terror once and for all. He knew the forest, knew the patterns of its animals and its creatures, and was certain that whatever had been stalking the woods was not of this world. Armed with his rifle, he ventured deep into the heart of the piney woods, his every sense on high alert. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the silence was suffocating, too quiet, too unnatural. He followed the path of destruction left behind by the creature, broken branches, torn bushes, crushed leaves, and soon he found what he was looking for. The beast. It was there, hidden in the shadows, its eyes glowing faintly, its body a dark silhouette against the trees. It was massive, too massive for any bear, its hulking form a twisted mix of shadow and muscle. Without hesitation, the hunter aimed his rifle, his finger tightening on the trigger. He fired, and the creature let out a roar so loud, so deafening, that the forest itself seemed to shake with its fury. But then, something unimaginable happened. The beast didn't fall. It didn't even stumble. Instead, it vanished. One moment it was there, standing before him, and the next it was gone. Disappeared into thin air, as though it had never existed at all. The hunter stood there, frozen in disbelief, his rifle still aimed at the empty space where the creature had been. There was no blood, no body, nothing to show that it had ever been there. Just the deafening silence and the faint, lingering smell of something rotting. And then, from deep within the forest, came a sound. A sound that chilled him to his very bones, a blood-curdling scream, a scream that seemed to echo for miles, reverberating through the trees, through his chest, rattling his very soul. It wasn't the scream of an animal. No, this scream carried with it something far darker, something that seemed to speak of an ancient terror, of a creature beyond human comprehension. Since that day, no one has dared to enter those woods after sunset. The stories of the creature, the disappearance, and the hunter's encounter have only grown more terrifying with time. The forest, once a place of natural beauty, has become a haunted land, a place whispered about only in hushed voices. People know better than to venture near the piney woods after dark, because the creature, whatever it was, hasn't left. It's still out there, waiting, watching. Those few who have had the misfortune of returning to the area say they've seen strange lights flickering in the distance, bobbing like will-o'-the-wisps in the dense fog that rolls in every nightfall. These lights, some say, are the eyes of the creature, glowing faintly from deep within the trees. Others believe they're the spirits of those who've gone missing, trapped in the forest, forever cursed to wander in search of an escape that will never come. But whatever they are a warning. A sign that something is still hunting in the dark, something far older, far more dangerous than any animal. The air around the woods feels different now, thicker, as though it's charged with some unseen energy. The trees seem to stretch farther, the shadows deeper, as if the forest itself has grown darker, hungrier. Every rustle of leaves, every whisper of wind through the branches, carries with it the promise that the monster is still there, lurking, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to cross its path. But no one dares to enter the piney woods anymore. Not at night, not after what happened. And yet, on the rare occasion when the wind is right, you might hear it, the low growl, the snap of twigs underfoot, or the faintest whisper of something moving just beyond the trees. And then the lights will flicker, and you'll know, the creature is still watching, still waiting for the next victim, and it will not stop hunting. In a remote Texas town, a mother's grief never left. The town, forgotten by many, sits in the shadow of an old, abandoned church at the edge of town. A church that once held the promise of life and salvation, but now stands as a crumbling monument to something darker. They say that on certain nights, when the wind carries the sorrow of the past, you can hear it, faint at first, like the soft wail of a child. The sound of a baby crying. But this is no ordinary cry. No simple sound of an infant in need. It echoes through the empty streets, filling the night air with a hollow, heartbreaking sound that carries a deep, unspeakable sorrow. And it comes from the old church, the very place where a mother's grief was sealed in time, waiting for someone to hear her child's cries, waiting for someone to uncover the terrible secret that still haunts the town. Locals know better than to approach the church after dark. They say the baby's cries are the product of a mother's unbearable sorrow, forever trapped in time, replaying over and over in the empty church, night after night. It's a sound that fills the air with an oppressive sadness, a wailing that seems to echo not just through the streets, but through the very soul of the town. For years, the people have lived with it, some pretending it's just an echo of the past, while others whisper in fear, knowing the truth is far darker. They say the cries come from the ghost of a mother who lost her child long ago, her heart broken, her grief so immense that it bound her to the very walls of the church. But here's the thing, the child she mourns never existed. Not in the way people think. Some say the mother's sorrow was so intense, so consuming, that it manifested the child in her mind, in her heart, an apparition created by a grief so powerful it took on a life of its own. The mother's grief has remained trapped in the church, her spirit wandering, forever crying for a child that was never born, never lived. A young couple new to town had heard the stories, of course, who hadn't? The locals spoke of the haunting cries, the mysterious wailing that echoed through the empty streets at night. But they had only just arrived, and like many before them, they thought it was nothing more than an old wives' tale. The town's legends, like so many others, were just stories passed down through generations, their roots buried in superstition and time. But curiosity is a powerful thing, and despite the warnings from the town's elders, they found themselves standing at the edge of the old church one evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The air was thick with the weight of the past, the church looming over them like a dark sentinel. The air around them felt heavy, as if the very earth was holding its breath. The couple stood at the gates, hesitant but determined, their hearts pounding in their chests. They didn't believe in ghosts or spirits, not really. But there was something about the church, something that unsettled them, a chill that seemed to grow deeper the closer they got. As they walked toward the door, that's when they heard it. A soft, heart-wrenching cry. At first, it was faint like the sound of a baby in distress, just on the edge of hearing. But then it grew louder. The sound grew in intensity, as if it was coming from inside the church itself. The young man turned to his partner, a questioning look on his face. But she was already moving toward the entrance, her curiosity pulling her forward despite the dread creeping up her spine. The door creaked open with a sound that echoed far too loudly in the still night air. Inside, it was cold, much colder than the evening air outside. The pews, covered in dust, sat as though waiting for the congregation that would never come. The faint light of the moon filtered through the broken windows, casting long shadows across the worn stone floor. And still the cry rang out, clearer now, louder, impossible to ignore. The couple stepped further inside, their footsteps muffled by the dust that had settled over everything. They glanced at each other, their expressions uncertain, as the cry seemed to come from deep within the church, reverberating off the stone walls. But as they turned the corner, the church was empty. No one was there. No baby. No mother. No spirit. Just the cold, abandoned air of a place long forgotten. And yet the sound, the unmistakable cry, continued, as though coming from the very walls themselves. Something was here, and it wasn't just the wind. Bravely, they ventured deeper into the church. Each step they took seemed to echo louder than the last, the silence around them growing heavier with each passing moment. The air in the church was thick, suffocating, and cold, unnaturally cold. A chill that seeped into their bones, making them shiver despite the heat of the summer night. The faint, mournful cry of the baby continued to fill the space, the sound now more intense, more desperate. It seemed to swirl around them, coming from every corner, but always from a place they couldn't quite reach. The woman's hand trembled as she clutched her partner's arm, her breath coming in short gasps. "We need to leave," she whispered, but he wasn't listening. His eyes were drawn to the far end of the church, where the shadows seemed to twist and shift unnaturally. There, in the back corner, hidden behind a broken pillar, was an object they hadn't noticed before, a cradle. Old and dusty, the wood was worn, its once beautiful carvings barely visible beneath layers of grime. The cradle seemed out of place in the abandoned church, as though it had been waiting for them. The woman stepped closer, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the cold in the air growing stronger as she neared the cradle. The baby's cry intensified, now so loud that it seemed to reverberate in her skull. The man hesitated but followed her, his feet heavy, as if the air was pushing against him. They reached the cradle, and when they looked inside, their stomachs dropped. It was empty, completely empty, save for one small thing. Tied to the leg of the cradle was a single black ribbon, fluttering slightly, as if it were being rocked by an unseen hand. It moved gently back and forth, in a rhythmic motion that sent a chill down their spines. The sound of the baby's crying grew louder still, but the cradle remained still, as if mocking their search for the source. For a moment, neither of them could move. The woman reached out, almost instinctively, to touch the ribbon. As her fingers brushed it, the crying stopped. All at once, an unnatural silence filled the room, so complete that it almost hurt. The woman's heart raced in her chest as she pulled her hand away, but the cradle continued to rock, just slightly, as if the child had never truly left. They tried to leave. The air was suffocating now, pressing in around them with an unnatural weight. The woman's hand was still trembling from the touch of the black ribbon, and her partner's breath was shallow, his heart racing. Every instinct screamed at them to turn around, to run. They had found what they came for, or so they thought. They needed to leave. But as they turned to head for the door, the worst thing happened. The door slammed shut behind them, so suddenly that the force of it rattled the old wooden frame. The echo of the door's impact reverberated through the church like a thunderclap, drowning out the sound of their own startled gasps. Panic surged within them as they rushed back to the door, their hands pulling at the cold, rusted handle, but it wouldn't budge. It was as though the very building itself had closed its grip around them, trapping them inside. The baby's cry, which had stopped for just a moment, returned, this time louder, more desperate, more urgent. It filled the room with such intensity that it seemed to press down on them, suffocating them, as if the sound itself were an oppressive force. Their eyes darted frantically around the church, searching for a way out, but it was only then that they saw it. In the far corner of the room, a shadowy figure stood. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a dark shape in the dim light, but as their eyes adjusted, they saw it more clearly. A woman. Her silhouette was tall, unnaturally still, as if she were frozen in time. Her face was hidden in darkness, her features obscured by the shadows, but the presence of her, unnerving, suffocating, was undeniable. The room seemed to pulse with the weight of her sorrow, and in her arms a child so pale, so still, that at first they thought it was a doll. But then they saw it, a faint, unnatural movement. The child in the woman's arms wasn't lifeless. It was a ghost, a pale, translucent figure, its eyes wide open, staring straight at them, unblinking. Its mouth was open, though no sound came from it, only the cry of the unseen baby, as if it were trapped in the space between the living and the dead. The woman's arms tightened around the child, and the cry became deafening. It was no longer just the sound of grief. It was the sound of something far darker, something far older. The church itself seemed to shake, the walls groaning, as if the very building was trying to hold back the weight of this tragic, unspeakable sorrow. When they finally managed to escape, the door, by some miracle, opened. The church released its grip on them, and the couple stumbled out into the night, gasping for breath, their bodies trembling from the horror they had just witnessed. The baby's cries stopped the moment they crossed the threshold, fading into the night as if they had never existed. For a moment, they stood in silence, the stillness of the world around them almost deafening after the relentless wailing inside. They thought it was over. They thought they had escaped. But the memory of the woman, of her sorrow, clung to them like a shadow. That night, as they lay in bed, trying to shake the feeling of the cold, oppressive air that had surrounded them in the church, they heard it. The baby's cry. It wasn't from the church this time, but from somewhere far away, carried on the wind, haunting their very dreams. It echoed in their minds, growing louder with each passing hour, a sound that could not be ignored. But it wasn't just the baby's cry they heard. It was the voice of the mother, faint, desperate, and full of a grief that could not be eased. The voice seemed to call out for her child every night, a mournful wail that rang through their minds as if the mother's spirit was reaching out from beyond the grave, trapped in eternal sorrow. The couple swears to this day that they heard it, every night, without fail. A constant reminder of what they had witnessed, of the darkness that still lingered in the town, in the church. But they were not the only ones to feel its pull. Over the years, rumors spread that the church had claimed new victims, those brave or foolish enough to ignore the warnings. People would visit, thinking they could brave the haunting, only to disappear, leaving behind only the memory of their footsteps, echoing in the empty streets. The church, it seemed, was not finished with its hunger. And some say that if you stand outside on certain nights, you can hear it, the cry of a child, the voice of a mother. And if you listen long enough, you might just hear the whispers of those who have gone in, never to return, trapped forever in the endless sorrow of the crying baby. Along the southern border of Texas, there's a town where the locals fear the night. Strange things happen when the moon is full, things that cannot be explained, things that defy reason. They say a shadowy figure crosses into town on those nights, moving like a wraith, silent and deadly. It doesn't make a sound as it slips through the streets, but its presence is undeniable. Destruction and chaos follow in its wake. Buildings burn, animals go missing, and the very air seems to change, growing thick with fear. The townspeople, terrified of what they cannot understand, keep to their homes, locking their doors and bolting their windows. No one dares venture out after dark, for once the moon rises high in the sky, something far darker than any nightmare stalks the town. But the shadowy figure is no ghost, no mere man or beast. It's something far worse. Some say it's a demon, cursed to roam the earth, drawn to this forgotten corner of Texas. Others believe it's a result of a pact long made, a price that the town must pay every full moon. No one knows for sure, and no one dares to find out. But one thing is certain. When the moon is full, the figure crosses into town, bringing with it a terror that can't be outrun. And no one, not a single soul, has ever been able to explain why it comes, or how to stop it. Some call it a demon, others say it's a curse placed on the land long ago, a dark pact made with powers beyond human understanding. Whatever it is, the residents of this forgotten town know better than to question it. The truth is too terrifying to face, too dark to comprehend. No matter how much they try to rationalize it, the full moon brings with it a terror that no one can explain or outrun. The town holds its breath, every single person waiting in silent dread as the moon begins to rise. When the first sliver of light touches the horizon, the doors are locked, the shutters are pulled down, and the streets fall silent. A cold unease fills the air as the wind stops, and even the crickets and coyotes fall silent, as if they too know that something far darker than nature is at play. The townspeople have learned to accept the inevitability of it. Every full moon, the same figure crosses into their town, and every full moon, it leaves destruction in its wake, burned homes, twisted bodies, and a sense of suffocating dread that lingers long after the moon sets. But even though they fear it, even though they know what's coming, no one dares to leave. No one dares to speak out loud about the shadow that stalks them, because to mention it is to invite its wrath. It's as if acknowledging it out loud is the very thing that gives it strength, that makes it real. So they stay trapped in their homes, holding their breath, praying that this time, they will survive. Reports from the local sheriff tell of strange occurrences that have plagued the town for years, events so unsettling that they can no longer be ignored. The first sign of trouble, as always, is the silence that descends on the town, as if nature itself knows something is coming. But the real terror begins when the moon rises, and with it, the reports flood in. Animals, once thriving, now left mutilated, torn apart in ways that defy logic. A goat, found disemboweled, its carcass hanging from the town's old oak tree, its eyes wide open in an expression of sheer terror. A dog, its fur singed, its body twisted unnaturally, as though it had been dragged through fire and thorns. The sheriff found one such animal in the woods, its body mangled beyond recognition, but the strangest thing of all was the markings left behind. Symbols carved into the ground, strange runes no one could decipher, as though something had tried to communicate, but the message was lost, perhaps deliberately so. Then came the markings on the buildings. At first, it was just a single house, scratches along the walls, long gashes like claws had raked through the wood, leaving deep, jagged marks. But soon more houses followed. The sheriff himself saw it one night, the marks appearing overnight, scrawled into the door frames, the windowsills, as though something had clawed its way into every home, marking them as its territory. But the most terrifying report of all came from a group of ranchers who swore they saw it. A figure moving through the darkness, a shadow without substance, too fast for the eye to follow. They described it as a shape that could shift, a figure that seemed to glide over the land with unnatural speed and strength. It wasn't a man, it wasn't an animal, but something in between, something that was neither fully of this world nor the next. The sheriff's deputy, who responded to their call, claimed he saw it too. But when they returned to the spot, there was nothing. No tracks, no traces of its passage, only the lingering scent of something foul, like decay, something dead. No one has ever seen its true form, not fully, but its presence is undeniable. The sheriff's office keeps a record of the strange occurrences, but even they cannot explain it. The townspeople know what they're dealing with, whether they acknowledge it or not. They've seen the figures in the distance, the way the shadow moves between the trees, the strange sounds of the night growing louder as the full moon climbs higher. But still no one speaks of it. They've learned to fear the silence more than the sound, the absence more than the presence. One night, a young man, tired of living in fear, decided to confront the shadow that haunted the town. He had heard the rumors, the stories whispered behind closed doors, but he wasn't afraid. Armed with nothing but his courage and a flickering lantern, he ventured into the desert, drawn to the town's old cemetery where the oldest legends began. The cemetery was a place long abandoned, its crumbling stones forgotten by time, its pathways overrun by thorny bushes and dry dirt. But it was here that the town's darkest tales began, of strange rituals, of curses placed long ago by those who had once inhabited the land. The man's footsteps were muffled by the thick sand, the wind howling around him, carrying with it the faintest whispers, whispers that seemed to come from the very earth beneath his feet. He could feel it, something out there in the dark watching him. The cemetery, though still and silent, seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something, or someone, to make their move. He reached the center of the graveyard, where the oldest headstones lay. The air around him grew colder, the temperature dropping rapidly, as if the night itself had decided to close in on him. His breath came out in clouds, the lantern flickering wildly in his shaking hands. He stood there for a moment, trying to steady himself, but it was then that he saw it, the shadow. At first, it was nothing more than a dark shape in the corner of his eye. But as he turned his head, the shadow seemed to grow, stretching out in ways that defied the moonlight. It didn't move like a man. It didn't move like any animal. It slithered, it shifted, as though it was made of the darkness itself, taking shape in ways that the human eye couldn't fully comprehend. The air around him became thick with an oppressive weight. His heart began to race as the shadow drew closer, creeping across the cemetery, blocking out the moonlight, swallowing the land in complete darkness. The young man tried to run, but his legs felt heavy, like they were being dragged down by some invisible force. He stumbled, falling to the ground, his hands grasping at the dirt, but it was too late. The shadow loomed over him now, too large, too vast for him to escape. And then he heard it, a low, guttural voice, so deep it felt like it was coming from the very earth itself. "You should not have come here." The ground beneath him trembled as the shadow shifted, revealing something far worse than he could have imagined. It wasn't just a figure, it was a creature, something ancient, with eyes that glowed like embers in the night. Its shape twisted, its limbs long and grotesque, its form barely human, its face obscured by a veil of darkness that seemed to move on its own. It raised its hand, and in that moment he knew he was no longer in control of his own fate. The creature didn't need to speak again. With a flick of its wrist, the young man's vision blurred, his body paralyzed, unable to move or scream. As the young man's legs buckled beneath him, his eyes fixed on the looming shadow, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the weight of the creature's presence pressing down on him, suffocating him with every breath. The darkness surrounding him seemed to expand, swallowing the moonlight, leaving him trapped in a void where nothing could escape. His body trembled, frozen in fear, but his gaze was locked on the figure, a tall, unnatural shape moving between the gravestones with an eerie fluidity, its form barely comprehensible, shifting as if it were made of the night itself. The wind howled around him, whipping the air, and with it came the unmistakable sound of a low, guttural growl, deep in the pit of his stomach, shaking his very bones. He took a step forward, against every instinct urging him to flee. But something drew him closer, a magnetic pull that he couldn't escape. As he approached, the shadow seemed to grow even taller, its shape sharpening into a twisted, monstrous form. Its eyes, two burning embers glowing through the darkness, suddenly locked onto him. The intensity of its gaze felt like fire, searing into his soul, and for a moment, he was sure he would burn from the inside out. The creature didn't speak. It didn't need to. Without a word, it extended one long, elongated arm, pointing to a single grave in the distance. A grave that had been buried under years of neglect, its headstone cracked and chipped. But what made it different, what made it stand out from the others, was the date carved into its weathered surface. A date so precise, so exact, that it made the young man's blood run cold. It was a date that seemed to be carved into the very fabric of time, a date marking the night when the curse began, the night the town was condemned to suffer forever. The creature's gaze never left him as he stood there, his feet rooted to the ground, unable to move or look away. The wind howled louder, the temperature dropping even further, as if the earth itself was recoiling in fear. The shadow's arm stayed outstretched, as if demanding acknowledgement of the curse it had unleashed upon the town. As the young man's breath came in ragged gasps, the creature slowly faded into the darkness, its form dissolving into the night. The wind died, the oppressive silence returning. And just like that, it was gone. The grave, the date, the shadow, everything was now branded into his mind. And as he stood there, a cold, terrifying realization began to settle in his chest. The curse wasn't just a story. It wasn't some old myth meant to scare children. It was real. And the date on that grave, it marked more than just a night. It marked a moment in time that no one could escape. The town was not only cursed by the figure, it was trapped in it forever. When the man fled, he left behind more than just his fear. His legs carried him away from the cemetery, away from the shadow, but something else was left behind, something far more insidious. His mind, once sharp and rational, was forever changed. What he had seen, what he had felt in that cursed place, was beyond comprehension. The image of the grave, the date, and the demon's eyes haunted him, replaying in his thoughts with an unrelenting ferocity. He could not escape it. He tried to run, to forget, but the curse was not bound by physical distance. It followed him, lingering in the corners of his mind, growing stronger with each passing day. No matter where he went, he could feel it, an overwhelming presence, like a weight pressing down on his soul. The shadow, the figure, the curse, it was as if it had attached itself to him, an inescapable darkness that walked with him wherever he went. People who encountered him, strangers on the road, told stories of his strange behavior. His eyes, wild and feverish, his rambling words about a town lost to time and a curse that could never be undone. They saw the way he would stare at the moon, his eyes filled with fear, as though expecting it to bring the demon back to him. And it didn't stop there. Strange occurrences began to follow him. Unexplained phenomena, fires starting without cause, strange markings appearing on his doorframes, objects found out of place. In every town he passed through, a shadow would follow him, always lingering, always just outside his vision. People in the places he stayed spoke of hearing whispers in the night, soft, guttural whispers that came from the darkness, just like the voice of the demon he had encountered. They would hear the cries of a child at midnight, soft at first, then growing louder as if they were moving closer, until it felt like the very walls were closing in. The curse of the demon is said to follow him wherever he goes, never letting him escape. And to this day, strange occurrences have been reported near the border, near the very place where the moon shines the brightest. The town remains abandoned, its people gone, but the curse still lingers, spreading its darkness to those who wander too close. No one knows what happens to the man who fled, or if he is still alive, but his story is now a part of the legend of the border. Some say the demon waits for those who are foolish enough to enter. Others believe it still walks the earth, looking for the next soul to claim. These are just a few of the terrifying true stories from Texas, but trust me, there are many more out there, waiting to be uncovered. What if one of these stories isn't over? What if something from Texas is still watching, still waiting to come for you? If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your own terrifying Texas experiences in the comments. What part of these stories left you trembling? And what do you think is really lurking out there in the dark corners of the Lone Star State? Stay tuned, the terror is far from over.